This is the Telepathic Instruments Orchid, and as of right now, they've only made 1,000 of them. Orchid looks like a synth, with a keyboard and some buttons, but Orchid is not just a synth. Orchid is more like an ideas machine. Those are their words, not mine. The Orchid is a pretty nifty hardware chord generator developed by Telepathic Instruments, a company co-founded by Kevin Parker of Tame Impala. This ideas machine just came out, and I've had my hands on it for a few days now, but before we take a more in-depth look at it, inside and out, let's first go back a few months. One fateful day this past November, while I was just minding my own business, it seemed like out of nowhere the talk of the town was Kevin Parker invents new instrument, Tame Impala launches a new musical ideas machine, meet the Orchid, a synthesizer that can produce moon sounds? I still don't know what that means. Now, I really enjoy Kevin Parker's music, but anytime I see a big-name artist attaching their name to a new piece of gear, I'm a little apprehensive due to things like the Donda stem player and the Soldier game. I noticed in one of the articles that there was a video from the official Telepathic Instruments YouTube, so I decided to watch that and get my information straight from the source. As soon as the video started, I'll be honest, I was immediately like, oh boy, they're gonna try to make a quirky, vintage-looking ad for yet another boring MIDI keyboard. But after I got about 15 seconds in, I realized that wasn't the direction that the video was going. The style the video is shot in is vintage-looking, but tasteful, and the way it guides you through some of the Orchid's features feels really casual. It's not just another boring MIDI keyboard, by the way. In fact, it barely even has a keyboard in the first place. I gotta say, this is probably the most enjoyable ad I've seen in a long time, and even if you're not interested in buying an Orchid for yourself, it's still a really well done video. I'll have a link to it in the description. During the 3-minute and 33-second duration of the teaser video, the capitalism gods were working their magic, and suddenly my wallet was burning a hole in my pocket. The only thing was, the video didn't say how much the Orchid was going to cost. Now, I'm signed up for the newsletter of a certain other music tech company, and anytime I see that they've released a new product, I try to guess how much they're asking before I open the email. I almost always wildly underestimate their prices, like the one time they released a folding table and I undershot the price by like $1,200, so I was preparing myself for the Orchid to have a steep price tag. I went back over to one of the articles that I had open in another tab, and I was pleasantly surprised at the modest asking price of $549, but also a little anxious about the initial release of only 1,000 units. Now, 549 big ones isn't cheap by any means, but assuming the Orchid has good build quality and can deliver on its features, I feel like it's a pretty good value for what you're getting. There are certainly other synths that cost a whole lot more and do a whole lot less. Tooling and manufacturing is very expensive to set up, and the shell of the Orchid is made up of funky but well-designed injection molded parts, none of which are off the shelf. Telepathic Instruments, which this is their first product, would have had to foot the bill for all the manufacturing costs, so I'm really glad that the Orchid didn't end up costing like $2,000. After delving into the articles and finding as much information as I could, which at this time information was pretty scarce, I realized that all I could do for the time being was sign up for yet another mailing list. A short time after, I was linked to The Garden, a free-to-join Patreon page where Telepathic Instruments would be handling the release of the Orchid and providing more information about this mysterious ideas machine. Tom Cosm, co-founder and technical director of Telepathic Instruments, actually did an AMA before the release and answered a lot of questions and even provided a few videos showing off some of the actual features for the very first time. Tom was great throughout the entire launch process, and it was such a breath of fresh air to have somebody that actually knew all the ins and outs of the Orchid actively communicating with people on Patreon. Let it be known that the Orchid isn't necessarily Kevin Parker's new invention, but rather an innovation originally thought up by Kevin Parker over a decade ago, then later brought to life by him and the other talented members of the Telepathic Instruments team over the course of about the last 5 years. I understand why the articles were phrased the way they were, but when I first saw the headlines, I imagined Kevin Parker locking his gates after returning from tour, only to re-emerge a year and a half later triumphantly with his new invention. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but that would have been pretty entertaining. A day or so before release day, Telepathic Instruments set up a countdown page on their Patreon that featured a chat. The idea was that the clock would count down to 0 and then display the password necessary to access the website and purchase an Orchid. Leading up to the big release, people in the chat seemed to be in high spirits. Many people talking about their plans for making music with the Orchid, or just sharing their general excitement. As the clock ticked down, the chat grew more and more active, and at the time of release had around 11,000 people, which is pretty crazy considering they were only selling 1,000. Over the previous days, I had set up several methods of auto-filling my information because I wanted to make sure I was as prepared as possible. I know these kinds of hyped-up super limited releases very rarely go as planned. Every time I try to snag one of these super limited drops, I have war flashbacks of the October 21st, 2015 Pepsi Perfect release. But if I can snag one of those, I can get myself an Orchid, right? I haven't looked ahead in the script yet. I don't know if I had to pay eBay secondary prices for one or not. As the countdown grew ever closer to 0, I could really start to feel the nerves. When the clock finally hit 0, it was supposed to show the password, but instead for me, it just stayed at 0. The excitement in the chat had turned to confusion and panic as people were trying to figure out where the heck the password was. Leading up to the release, I had noticed Patreon starting to act a little funny and load slowly, so I was very apprehensive about refreshing the page, but with it being nearly 1 minute past the intended release time at this point, I felt like I had no other choice. I refreshed the page and held my breath and definitely wasn't uttering rude words at my screen, and after what felt like an eternity, the page finally refreshed and still only displayed 0 on the timer. I felt my hopes of getting an Orchid start to fade away. Visions of October 21st, 2015 started to flood my head. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a beacon of light shined out in a sea of angry chat messages. Unfortunately, this Good Samaritan's name is lost to time as everything was happening so quickly, but I just happened to see a chat message that said capital F, $, capital M, capital J, at lowercase z, capital Z, and I thought back to part of the Telepathic Instruments website that used this specific chord as an example, and I thought this must be the password. I went to click on the chat message to copy it, but in my haste I nearly closed out the window. That would have certainly been a run ender for sure. With now what I'm not even sure is the password copied, I quickly went over to my other monitor that had the enter password page opened and pasted it as quickly as possible. This time I'm pretty sure I actually held my breath, and to my delight it actually worked and I was in. During the days leading up to the release, I had been practicing speedrun strats on the website and I had it in my cart and it was in checkout in probably about 2 seconds flat, so I guess it paid off. I had to wait a few seconds in a queue before it let me actually check out, but once I was through, I auto-filled my information as fast as possible. I hit submit order pretty much the instant it came on my screen, and my card got declined. I started scrambling for my wallet to enter my information manually, but I knew there was no time, so I just had to try it again. I clicked submit order a second time, and it actually went through. Order confirmed. I double-checked my email just to make sure it went through, and the second I confirmed I had actually snagged one, I jumped up from my chair and uttered a quick, "Who do you think you are? I am." It felt like an eternity, but my order went through 3 minutes after the intended drop time, and my order number was around the middle of the 1,000 units. I imagine it probably sold out within a minute or so of me snagging mine. After containing my excitement a bit, I returned to the countdown page to find the Patreon community that had formed in shambles. It was a bleak scene of many deleted messages, people denouncing Telepathic Instruments, people sharing similar qualms with their cards being declined and them missing out. It's unfortunate, but with 11,000 people in the chat and only 1,000 units, there was always bound to be disappointed people. Especially for a company as new as Telepathic Instruments, it's not really a surprise it didn't go as smoothly as everyone was hoping, but it wasn't nearly as bad as some of the limited drops I've experienced in the past. Heck, companies much bigger and much older than them have squandered limited releases much worse. Shortly before the time of the launch, the quoted date that the first round of 1,000 Orchids would ship was February 2025. Now this isn't my first rodeo, and I know new product launches like these have a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver, especially when they start throwing out ship dates before they even have the retail version of the product in their hands. But I gotta tip my hat to Telepathic Instruments and put a gold star next to their name because they did actually follow through with this, and orders did indeed ship before the end of February. It came down to the wire, and mine shipped out literally right before the end of February. But hey, February is February, and I was prepared and half expecting to wait a lot longer. After spending only 10 short days doing absolutely nothing in customs, my Orchid finally arrived. The first 1000 came with a complimentary case, and from the limited pictures available prior to release, I wasn't expecting a whole lot, but to my surprise, it's a nice hard-shell zip-up case that cushions the Orchid nicely, and bonus points that it even has a little cutout where you can store all your goodies. Also included in the case is a postcard, Chord notebook, quick start guide, and some paperwork saying that Telepathic Instruments didn't commit any war crimes whilst making this device. Or I don't know, I didn't read it. The postcard is also hand-numbered, saying exactly where this Orchid landed in the original run of 1000. Noticeably absent inside the box is a charging cable, to which Telepathic Instruments cites environmental reasons as to why they didn't include one. It just charges over USB Type-C, so the vast majority of people buying an Orchid will already have a way to charge it, but this is a trend that I've noticed becoming increasingly common in the last few years, and as someone who hoards cables, it would have been nice if it came with one, but this is a very minor nitpick. So at long last, we have the Orchid here on our attractive green mat, and right off the bat, the build quality feels pretty solid, which at its price point, I would certainly hope so. It has a nice weight to it, but it's still light enough, even in the case, to be very much considered portable. Aside from the power button and ports for our USB Type-C, audio jack, and 5-pin MIDI, all the controls for the device are visible and readily accessible. We've got some nice feeling rotary encoders with some fancy knobs here for controlling various aspects of the Orchid. Okay, I know you're staring at the single octave keyboard and wondering where the heck the rest of the notes are. Like, how are you supposed to play anything with this? Bass is my main instrument, and initially I was pretty worried about the fact that I don't even have the real estate to play an octave. But that line of thinking is because I made the mistake of approaching this instrument like a traditional synthesizer. This isn't a synth, this is an ideas machine. We can select a root note with the keyboard, and if we press one of these buttons over here, we get a chord. We've got all the hottest chords of the season. Minor chords, major chords, diminished chords, and then we have the second row of buttons for different chord extensions. The keys are velocity sensitive, and they feel fine. They're nothing to write home about, and not weighted or anything, but they're perfectly acceptable. They're not full size, but at the same time they're not the super small, annoying, tiny mini keys. And the Orchid's not so white keys measure in at 95mm by 8mm. So the keyboard selects the root note, the buttons select the chord, and then the big voicing dial right here moves the chord up and down the keyboard, cycling through different inversions. This smaller voicing dial is for selecting the optional bass note that you can have the Orchid play when you play a chord. This bass note actually comes from a bass synth engine that's completely separate and can be independently controlled from the main chord synth engine, so I guess that means the Orchid is technically multi-timbral. There are currently 40 different sounds for the main chord synth engine and 12 for the bass synth engine, but Telepathic Instruments say they'll be adding more in the future via firmware updates. The Orchid calls its preset patches sounds, as each sound has different performance mode settings and effects that are applied to them by default. The performance modes are just different ways of expressing the notes, like different arpeggios and even simulated strumming like on a harp or guitar. Like I said, each sound has different performance mode settings and effects set by default, but if you want to lock a specific one, all you need to do is press and hold either the perform or effects knob, and then you're free to change the sound without that setting changing. Supposedly, Kevin Parker himself had a lot of involvement in developing all the sounds on the Orchid, and whether this is true or not, I can't deny that pretty much all the sounds the Orchid has to offer sound really good and are all very musical. There are two speakers hiding under these speaker grills, and I'm actually blown away by how good they sound. Like, they're really good. Now don't get me wrong, this thing really shines when you plug it into a good set of speakers or headphones, but the built-in speakers are loud, clear, and in stereo. Not to throw any shade here, but I'm used to portable synth speakers being absolute dog water, so this was a nice surprise. I'm going to be diving more into the settings and different sounds the Orchid can make, as well as assigning it a KnobScore, but first we're going to take it apart. Did I mention they only made 1,000 of these? Oh, please subscribe. Don't worry, we're gonna put it back together and make some more beeps and boops. But ever since I noticed this little detail in one of the AMA videos that Tom Cosm recorded, I've been really curious if the Orchid is actually run off a Raspberry Pi 02W or if the finished product uses a more custom solution for the microcontroller. If we flip the unit over, there are 7 Phillips head screws that we'll start off by removing, and I seem to have gotten a little ahead of myself because I assume there was an additional screw under the label since it's not immediately apparent as to how it comes apart.
What have I done? I'm the biggest idiot ever. There wasn't a screw there.
So after getting the label back in place, it was as good as new, but I was still having some difficulty gaining access to the secrets hiding inside. This was until...
Oh.
The other side was still giving me some trouble, so I removed the voicing dials for a quick boost in morale, and with that I was able to make quick work of it.
There's our battery. Nice blue lithium-ion battery. No swelling, yet. And we have exposed 3 cheeky little hidden screws.
After removing the freshly exposed screws, I figured the top section would just pop off, but once again the Orchid made a fool out of me and it wasn't quite that straightforward.
It's a musical instrument, so of course a guitar pick would work for opening it.
And with the tabs popped and a little bit of persuasion, the top section was finally off.
And we are in. Okay, so there are some things that need disconnected here. Oh crap, we've turned it on. We have turned it on, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, there we go. I'm shaking. I think I've managed to open it without ruining it. Snap a couple of quick pictures of what the inside looks like. So I've disconnected the top 2 little wiring harnesses there. And you can see, let's disconnect this one too. Voila! That's not quite what I was expecting. I'm pleasantly surprised. That looks pretty good. Definitely very custom. No Raspberry Pis in here. Look at that. That is nice. I'm not going to disassemble it any further than this, because I already have my work cut out for me putting this back together. But it looks like there might be another board under, which is what the MIDI port is connected to. It might just be like a little breakout board for that though. But that's that is nothing to shake a stick at there. That is very custom. And it looks like we have some printing on it. Unfortunately, the battery doesn't have anything printed on it. And I could probably take it out, but honestly I kind of just want to put this back together. That's pretty neat. You can see our nice speakers there.
It seems like I can't stop talking about these speakers, but they're really cool and sound great in person. They're custom designed for the Orchid and feature these little baffle boxes, presumably for helping with low frequencies. I've never seen a speaker setup like this with such a small form factor, and I really appreciate these kinds of details.
I've changed my mind. I've decided that I will not be able to sleep soundly tonight if I do not take this battery out. So that's what we're gonna do. I mentioned about how expensive this would have been to have injection molded, especially on such a small scale. I mean, look at this. This is not an easy part to injection mold. Like, this is pretty impressive. Let's disconnect the battery. There we go. Oh, am I gonna have to take the speaker out too? Well, it appears that these are security screws, but not in the traditional sense that they require a special bit or anything, but they just strip out no matter what bit you use. So it seems like those screws are made out of like wax or something. So I guess I'll never be able to sleep soundly again, but let's let's just get this thing put back together. It's not that big of a deal.
So, after disassembling the Orchid in reverse, it was all safely put back together, and I didn't even have any extra parts.
Something I just noticed, which is pretty interesting, is that this knob is actually semi-transparent. It's like a smoked plastic. Is the other one like that too? No. That one's just solid black plastic. That's pretty interesting. So, even though this looks black, it's, yeah, semi-transparent. That's kind of an interesting Easter egg there. Alright, we managed to not destroy it.
Alright, so everything's back together now, so let's crack our fingers and get into the nitty-gritty of more of the Orchid's musical features. I'm going to plug in a stereo TRS audio cable and send the audio from the Orchid straight to the mixer for your listening pleasure. The sound quality from the Orchid is really impressive, and I hope that comes through in the video. We've got our 40 different sounds, or actually 39 I guess, because on the current firmware version, the sound number 15 doesn't seem to exist. I mentioned earlier that each of these sounds has different default performance modes and effects settings, and I'm going to just go through some of my favorites, but they're all pretty good. Right now, the performance modes are Strum, Slop, which is like a simulated human feel, Arpeggiate, Pattern, and Harp. The only onboard effects at the moment are reverb, chorus, ensemble, drive, flanger, tremolo, phaser, and delay. It's kind of weird how the effects get applied because there are 3 active on each sound, but you can't individually select which effects you have applied. You have to find a set of 3 effects that you like, lock it, and then change it to the sound that you want. It's a strange way to do effects, and it's not necessarily my favorite, but the onboard effects all sound pretty good. The chorus and reverb are especially lush and definitely fun to play around with. Telepathic Instruments say that the preset sounds are pre-designed to take full advantage of the synth engine's capabilities, and I guess I can see this, but I still wish it was easier to get a little more under the hood with the sounds. The key knob next to the effects knob is optional to use, but when pressed can be used to lock all the notes you play to whatever key you want. This puts the Orchid in a mode where you can play chords with a single key press, and every note will be quantized to the key of your choosing. You can still get adventurous and use the chord extension buttons to add some flavor and go out of key, but as soon as you stop, everything goes right back to being in key. If you press and turn the key knob at the same time, then you can transpose the whole key 1/2 step at a time. Key mode could probably be really useful for someone trying to learn music theory, especially if you set the screen to one of the other views like Geek Out mode. The bass knob changes the current active bass sound, and you can have it set to play with just chords, anytime a key is pressed, or even just the bass by itself. There are no additional effects or fancy performance modes for the bass synth, but I think that's fine since most of the time you're just going to be using it to accent the root note of whatever chord you're playing. Our next knob is for the onboard looper, and normally I'm really picky about loopers, and in my opinion they're usually implemented really poorly, but the loop functionality on the Orchid is really intuitive to use, has overdub, and is really simple to clear and re-record. You can easily set the tempo with the BPM knob, and pressing it turns the metronome on and off. No annoying menu diving required. I was expecting that I would never want to use the looper, but it's quickly becoming one of my favorite features of the whole device. For anyone wondering, you can go as low as 60 BPM or as high as 200. When you record a loop, you can play around with the sound, performance, and effects settings, and they'll change on the fly even while looping. Our last two knobs are the Options knob, which is used to delve into the lengthy list of device settings, and the Volume knob. The Volume knob controls the volume of the Chord synth, and if you press and turn it at the same time, then it changes the volume of the bass synth. A short press of this knob quickly flashes up the battery percentage. You can charge the Orchid with any old USB Type-C cable, but to get it to charge in the 1 hour like Telepathic Instruments advertises, you're going to need a fast charger. 8 hours of playtime on a full charge seems about right, as I've only had to charge mine once, and I probably won't need to charge it again for a little while, even though I've been using it quite a bit. If you plug the Orchid into something that can recognize it as a MIDI device, like a computer, it doesn't seem to charge, which I think is a bit strange, but if you just plug it into the wall, you'll be fine. The Orchid can send MIDI over USB Type-C, and when connected to your DAW, it can actually send all of the notes from your chords and arpeggios. There's also the 5-pin MIDI port, which sends MIDI out over 3 separate channels. One channel for the chords, one channel for the performance mode notes, and one channel for the bass notes. I've found it really enjoyable to control my other synths with the Orchid, and you can get some really huge sounds from controlling multiple at the same time. Unfortunately, right now, it doesn't seem like there's a way to send out a clock signal over MIDI, which is kinda crummy because it'd be nice to sync it up with other sequencers and especially drum machines. Something that the Orchid community discovered before mine even came in the mail was that you can actually control it with MIDI in despite this not being advertised or talked about at all by Telepathic Instruments. The synth sounds are solid, so it's definitely a welcome feature, but I do think it's interesting that it was never mentioned, and I almost wonder if it's not an intentional feature. So I've really been enjoying my time with the Telepathic Instruments Orchid, and while initially I was cautiously optimistic about the product, any doubts I had were quickly put to rest as soon as I had my hands on it. I did encounter a few minor bugs, all of which had already been reported to the Telepathic Instruments team, and as of writing this script, a firmware update is in the works and should be coming very soon. The Orchid definitely isn't for everyone, as it's not a traditional synthesizer, but if you're in the market for a fairly novel chord machine, or just another tool to add to your songwriting arsenal, then you'd probably enjoy it. I almost wish that I had more negative things to say, but the Orchid seems pretty airtight. Well, I still wouldn't put it in water. It doesn't have gaskets or anything. It's not literally airtight. You know what I mean. Anyways, now it's time to give it a KnobScore. Starting with the musicality categories, the Orchid has a whole host of great sounds for both the chord and bass synth engines, so for sounds it gets a 9 out of 10. For effects, there are only a handful at the moment, and they are a little awkward to use, but the ones present do sound good, so it gets a 6 out of 10. There are a lot of great features like key mode and the looper, and there's always the possibility of more in the future through firmware updates, so it gets an 8 out of 10. There is a little bit of a learning curve in developing the muscle memory to effectively play chords, but if you have any background in music theory or playing a keyboard, the Orchid should be pretty easy to pick up, so it gets a 7 out of 10. Anytime I fire the Orchid up, I find it very easy to stumble upon interesting sounds, and it does seem to live up to the claim of being an ideas machine, so for inspiration it gets a 9 out of 10, for a total musicality score of 39 out of 50. We'll move on to the design categories now, and while aesthetics may be subjective, I do like the looks of an Australian Commodore 64 that's merged with an old printing calculator, and at the very least it doesn't look boring, so it gets an 8 out of 10. The Orchid is fairly simple to use, and while there are some deeper settings that you can tweak, there really isn't much menu diving, and all of the controls are pretty intuitive, so it gets an 8 out of 10. The overall design is well thought out, the rotary encoders all feel crisp, and the unit feels solid in the hand, and while the keyboard isn't the best I've ever felt, there's nothing wrong with it, and it seems to be built well, so it gets an 8 out of 10. The Orchid is lightweight, fairly compact, and has great speakers. All of that coupled with the case make it a portable powerhouse, but it doesn't exactly fit in your pocket, and personally it doesn't fit nicely on my rack, so it gets an 8 out of 10. The Orchid is not cheap by any means, but boutique synths like this never are. The build quality, sound quality, and features that the Orchid offers are reminiscent of synths in much higher price categories, so it gets a 9 out of 10 for a total design score of 41 out of 50. Add it all up and the KnobScore is 80, which is pretty good I think. It's very exciting that I was able to be a part of the launch of the Orchid, and I'm looking forward to seeing what kinds of features Telepathic Instruments rolls out in the future. As of right now, the next batch of Orchids are slated to release mid-2025, and while there are no official numbers yet, I imagine it'll be a run larger than 1,000 now that they've started getting feedback from the first batch. It was fun to be able to document the Orchid inside and out, and eventually if the ability to output a clock is never added, I might get my hands dirty and try my hand at modding it. But in the meantime, I've got some other projects occupying my time, similar to videos like my MIDI drum pants. Be sure to like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, and as always, feel free to subscribe.